Throughout our lives, we face a lot of decisions, don't we? There are all kinds of decisions that we make. Some are minor, like, am I getting out of bed today? Okay, maybe that's not that minor. How about, what am I going to wear today? Now, for some of you, that is not a minor decision. I know and I respect that very well. And to some of you to whom it is not a minor decision, you know that to others it is a minor decision. I remember years ago I came out ready for services, and early in our married life, and my wife, she looked at me, she looked me up and down, and she said, "You're not wearing that to church, are you?" And I said, no, I saw you were a little down today, so I just thought I'd just do a horrific joke and just crack you up. And I'm just so glad I got you to laugh. I got you there, so I'll go change now. My wife has helped me tremendously in that regard over the years. But I think that we know that there are quite a few decisions that are minor, and they almost become non-decisions because they're just a routine part of our life, such as what am I going to have for breakfast? What way am I going to go to work or to school or whatever, and so on. Other decisions seem to be knee-jerk reactions, or can be knee-jerk reactions. I think some of us remember when we used to go to the doctor would have us sit on a bench, and then he would take a little mallet, a rubber mallet, and hit our knee or just below the knee to see what type of reaction we would have or what our reflexes were. And for some people it would be bam, and for others it would just be a slight reaction. And so I think it's a very good analogy with knee-jerk reactions with decisions we sometimes make. Sometimes there's not much of a reaction at all, we make a decision. And other times it can be a big reaction in that responsibility that we have. Others that we make do seem to be or are unquestionably major in our lives. About school, about work, about relationships, about life in general, such as from what we do or avoid doing, who we deal with and how, or avoid dealing with certain times or altogether, and even relating to what we think and what we dwell on, what we say, or I'm sure other things come to mind as well. What are some of the decisions that you have made recently? And what impact did those decisions have on your day, your week, the year, or perhaps your life? And how do you make decisions? Do you have a standard plan, a modus operandi? And what have you learned so far in life regarding that important responsibility that we have been given, all of us, in making decisions on a day-to-day basis and in our lives as a whole? This afternoon, I'd like us to take a look at making decisions. Specifically, I'd like to go over several keys relating to making decisions, bad decisions. That's right. Poor decisions that can impact our own life, if not others, in a very negative way. And sometimes perhaps we don't think about it as often as we may need to, or at least consider from time to time. Now, again, my point is to help to cover keys to make bad decisions. And there's one handy thing about this. I mean, I don't have time to cover all the different keys to making bad decisions because there are so many of them. Some might be coming to mind right now. But one of the cool things about it is these keys, these elements I will cover, you don't have to follow all of them. Okay? You can pick just one, or you can pick a couple, or if you want, you can select them all, and I guarantee they will help you in achieving your goal to make bad decisions. So let's see, what are we going to do here? I didn't decide which way I'm going to cover this yet, but okay. Just have a number of key points and then subpoints for you. Now, some of you may have learned some or all of these. You may have personal examples to verify how well they work. And we'll look into a few biblical examples as well. And perhaps after services, we could have some interesting discussions, sharing with each other experiences we have that prove these. Or maybe not. Maybe we won't do that. And by the way, you can jot these down if you would like to, so that if you have an opportunity to make a bad decision and you may not remember one of the effective methods of doing so, you'll be able to flip out a 3x5 or your notes app from your phone, and they will help you succeed. And your diligence will be rewarded. The more effort you put into making a bad decision, your effort will be rewarded. And I think we'll see that as we go through some of these points. Okay, so first major point I'm going to make is make a decision as quickly as possible. Okay, as quickly as possible. Don't be concerned with getting all the facts. They'll probably just slow you down. Just base your decision on the first thing that comes to mind. And if there seems to be any confusion or uncertainty, don't let that stop you. Just make a decision, even if it means flipping a coin. You know what I mean? Just get her done. Get it done. Now, you can always brew on a decision forever, going from one extreme to the other and even not making a decision at all. But remember, that's not what I'm covering. I'm covering how to make a bad decision. So I'm not even going to point to any delay whatsoever. I'm not even going to mention it, or I wasn't going to. The second major point that I'd like to make is try to fulfill your wants and desires above all else, right? I mean, my will be done, right? I did it my way. You remember that one? Avoid taking into account right or wrong, at least as defined by anyone but you, right? Because you're wanting to fulfill all your wants and your desires. And another subpoint to that is justify, justify, justify. Reason it out in your mind. I mean, some of us have had good experience in doing this. After all, this is you, right? It's your decision, and it's you that really matters. And so don't let other people get in the way, right? I mean, especially, this is a point I feel important to make to husbands and wives, because the spousal units may want to be involved in a decision, and if you're intent on making a bad decision, at least one that will have negative effects, don't include them. Don't include them. Now, I want to give you an example where I was given credit for making a bad decision that I really didn't deserve. I've had other opportunities that I did to deserve that credit, but several years ago, my wife and I, we love to travel internationally. We have loved to have the opportunity to serve in feast sites around the world, sometimes going where no one else seemed to want to go or could go because of family issues and all that. We were asked quite a few years ago if we would be willing to go to Sri Lanka for the Feast of Tabernacles. And we were totally thrilled with that opportunity. We also visited India before. And we thought, well, this is the only opportunity we will ever get to visit, these areas and these people. So at the end of the feast, with the brethren that we had grown so close to in such a short period of time, basically spending all of our time together, we were basically saying our so long as, see you in the kingdom. Since then, we've been there 3 additional times. And the opportunities came for similar reasons, because of others not being available. Well, a few years back, my parents, whom some of you knew, were going through quite a few health challenges and other trials before they did die. And that was very taxing, of course, to them, but also to us. We also had some other family matters that were in our immediate family with health problems that were quite draining to us. Well, one day I came home from work, and I was really surprised because my wife, Marguerite, is French-Canadian, some of you know. And I have found that a lot of French-Canadian individuals, if they are troubled about something, they cannot hide it, no matter how much they try. And so when I came home, I could see something was wrong. And so I, after greeting her and seeing that she was trying to hide something, I said, "What's up? What's the matter?" And she said, "I heard that you volunteered for us to go to India for the feast again this year. And with all that we've been going through, I don't feel I'm up to it. I don't feel I could take it." And she was almost in tears. And I said to her immediately, "No, I did not volunteer to do that. I don't know where you heard that I did, but do you really think I would ever make such a monumental decision without talking to you first? Because that's never well, anyway. So anyway, I calmed, the whole situation calmed down. Everything was good after, a while in discussing it. And me telling her I would never make such a decision without talking to you about it, especially with what we've been going through. Well, that year we had the delightful opportunity to visit the brethren in Alberta, in Red Deer, Edmonton, and Calgary, Alberta, for the Passover and for the first day of unleavened bread and the night to be much observed. And that was wonderful. It was just a wonderful opportunity. We knew the people. We had been there before. It was a very special time of year, of course, for all of us. And again, we were happy to fulfill that need, and also it was kind of a getaway, So we were sitting there on the plane. Well, before I mention what that we were sitting on the plane, I better tell you what led up to this story. And that was the day before us leaving. I had Mr. Doug Horchak come into my office and sit down. And he said, "Dave, we've been discussing manpower needs for the Feast of Tabernacles this year." And I said, "Yes, I know. I had been gathering information through surveys we do of the ministry." And he said, "And we were seeing certain needs that were not being fulfilled, and certain things that we needed to look into, and one of the needs was in India." And so Mr. Frank said, "Well, Dave has gone there before. Why don't we just ask him to go?" And so he smiled at me. And I kind of didn't smile back, kind of just looked at him and said, "Well, I'll have to get back to you." And I thought about it, I prayed about it, I felt, what if we are supposed to do this? What if this is something we are supposed to do? I do have to ask Marguerite about it, I have to talk to her about it, and I have no idea how I'm going to do that because of her previous reaction. And so I'm sitting there thinking about it, praying about it. So we get on the plane, and international flight, excitement, cheerfulness, et cetera, et cetera. So I looked over at her and I smiled. She looked back at me and she smiled. I thought, that's delightful. I said, "So you still like to travel internationally?" She said, "Oh, yes, I love it. I love the opportunity. I love the experience. And this is going to be wonderful. We'll be with brethren again from another country. Just delightful." I said, I said, "Because I was told yesterday that there's an international need, and we've been asked if we'd be willing to go. And she said, oh, she looked at me and she said, oh, really, where? And I said, India. And she looked at me and she said, oh, are we going? And I'm like, what? I said, I can't believe you said that after the last reaction you had. She said, well, I was very stressed then. I'm doing much better now, and I would like to go. So here, I mean, you can understand why I was given credit previously for making a bad decision that I did not deserve at all. I can't take any credit for that at all, but there may be other opportunities that come from time to time. We'll see how it goes. But again, don't let others get in the way because you're wanting to fulfill your own wants, your own desires, your own needs. And so don't let anybody else get in the way if you want to make a bad decision. Or if you can use someone else as a stepping stone, you might want to take advantage of that. But including someone to make the decision, I don't know about that one. Okay, the next one is only think of the present, not the long term. Okay, it's here and it's now. I'll cross whatever bridges there are, if they are there, when I come to them. I mean, that's down the line. It's not important now. Now is what matters. I've got to make this decision and feel good about it. Don't feel that you need to worry about the future outcome or your reputation. Don't have that in mind. After all, who cares about this other than me, right? Okay, there may be someone I'm trying to impress, but that's my business and nobody else's. What happens, happens, after all. So only think of the present, not down the line. Next major point is trust yourself. Trust yourself. Trust your gut, your instinct. Now, sometimes that can be helpful in making good decisions, but stick with me here. We're focusing on making bad decisions, all right? So if there's any wavering or wondering of what someone else might think or say, just trust yourself, nobody else. And a subpoint to that is sometimes you've just got to say, why not? Why not? I mean, like I said, I'm not going to give any personal examples. I'm not going to give any deep examples at this point, just some, general ones that you may or probably don't relate to at all, but other ones might come to mind, like, why not? Okay, I know I should go to bed now. Got to get up early in the morning. But I think I'll just watch one more episode of this on Netflix because I really like it a lot. And what's really cool is if I fall asleep, and I may need to, and if I do, I will, If I need to be sleeping, I'll be sleeping. But right now, just one more episode. And if I fall asleep right in the middle of it, I can just bing, bing, get back there. I mean, it's great. So why not? I mean, tomorrow will be another day. Hopefully a better one, we'll see. Another example. On my GPS, there is no indication of a reported policeman on this highway. And so one car did pass me, and he was flying. And it is fun. So I'm going to stomp on it for at least just a little bit, because I like to do that every once in a while. And why not? I don't do it all the time. Actually, I heard in Houston that's okay. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, another example. One more drink is not going to kill me. I know right where I'm at. I can tell that everything is okay and we're good. So one more is really not, that big a deal. And why not? Anyway, perhaps these are just a couple simple examples, and maybe some others came to your mind. Sometimes you've just got to say, why not? And other times, You've got to say no way in making a bad decision. Just no way. Like getting out of bed, you know. I can always hit the snooze button one more time. How many has it been? Well, it doesn't matter. One more. I can just do that once. Or doing homework. Hello? I've got better things to do tonight, and there is no way I'm going to waste my time doing homework because tomorrow is another day. And I have a study hall. And I have friends in the study hall. They'll understand it. We've been there before. Can't remember exactly what happened, whether we did it or not. But anyway, tomorrow I'll worry about it. I mean, there is just no way I'm going to do this now because it just doesn't feel like what I want. So that's where I'm going. Or focusing on a project at work with a deadline that is upcoming and is quite stressful. In fact, it's so stressful that I needed to take a break, and I would get back to this project, but you know, I'm almost to the next level of this game. And this is good. This is a good game. In fact, it is improving my eye-hand coordination. And I know someday my boss is going to thank me for doing this. I just know he is. So just one more level, I got to get to it, and I'll get to that later, you know. That's what I want to do right now. Now again, in trusting yourself, that's what we're talking about, this important key element in making bad decisions. If things become very emotional, sometimes they do. They become very emotional, go with your heart. Just go with your heart. If it feels right, it feels right, right? Am I right or am I right? Right. Everything feels like I should just do this or avoid doing that, but got to trust the heart. And that's how I feel about it, and I'm getting a little tense about delaying this decision, and I'm making it right now. So yes, trust yourself. But as some of you might, you know, because I know there are some of you who are more oriented this way than others, because I've seen it in my family as well. If you do feel a need for input, you know, if you feel a need for input, seek it only from peers or people who think the same way you think, you know. Avoid dealing with older people. They may not agree with you while you're trying to make this decision. They might not want you to experience things that they've been through. What? My life? I mean, really. Stay away from ministers or other leaders in the church. They might be mature or more experienced. Got my own life to live. And if you want to make a bad decision, avoid all those obstacles. Because again, they might be getting in your way. Don't seek advice from those with experience in the area of concern. If you've got a decision to make about this, that, or the other thing, and you know someone has been through this or they've gone through, don't go there. Because again, you want to make a bad decision, keep that focus. Keep that focus and avoid anything that will get in the way. I mean, and we know experience is the best teacher, right? So I got to go through it myself. That's the law, kinda, you know? And if you've had any experience in the past, if you've had any bad experiences from going through the same type of process, you know, and something went wrong, forget about it. Just forget about it. Because it could have been other people involved or certain circumstances that may not have any bearing this time around. So just put the past behind, you know, just forget about it and make the decision, you know. The last major point that I would like to make, and I know I made quite a number of points, you know, and I had the sub-points, and some of you had points and points and points, but just so you know, I thought 6 would be a good number, so this is my 6th major point in making bad decisions. And it can be a real winner, a real winner for you. And that is avoid prayer. avoid prayer. Now, it's probably going to feel uncomfortable anyway. If you're really aimed at making a bad decision, just don't go there. Or if you do pray, remember that prayer does not have to include asking for advice, guidance, and direction. It can just be sharing your decision and then feeling good about it. I shared it with God, onward we go, right? So if you feel you have to pray, that's a thing you can do. So, just got a couple options there for you. Okay, so again, we've only looked at a certain number of keys to making bad decisions or decisions that will have some negative output, maybe not immediately. You might be disappointed. It's not going to have any immediate negative impact, but it can down the road that will finally show itself. Remember, you don't need to follow them all. You can pick one or a couple, and you'll mostly be successful in doing that. Let's look at a few examples of bad decisions we find in the Bible and how they relate to some of the keys that we have covered. I'm not going to share any personal examples, as I mentioned, or the reasons for them. We have plenty in the Bible. Let's stick to the Word, okay? None of this personal stuff. And our own probably don't need to be shared right now, and some may not need to be shared till the kingdom, or the great white throne judgment, when we're going to try to be helping people learn from decisions that we've learned from in a more personal way. But anyway, back to the bad decisions. Here's some examples of bad decisions. Let's look at Isaiah 14. Isaiah chapter 14. And some of you already know what I'm going to be focusing on here, and that is Lucifer, who didn't agree with God's plan for himself or for you or for me. Did he have confidence? Did he have a solid feeling about who he was and what he could accomplish? Did he count on his own reasoning? Did he seek to fulfill his desires above all else? Did he seek any advice from someone who taught him? Isaiah 14, verse 13, "For you have said," God was saying to Lucifer, "you have said in your heart, I will go up to the heavens. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will also sit on the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north," step by step, upward and onward, right? Verse 14, "I will go up above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High." And we all know what the future is from that bad decision. And what about the fallen angels? Those who were convinced by he who became Satan, they followed what they were convinced of about themselves. Sounded great to them. And they followed the lead. And we all know what the future is from that bad decision. Let's turn to Genesis chapter 3. Genesis chapter 3. Probably a familiar story to most, if not all of us above 4 years old, or maybe even below that. Eve was convinced that what she did was the better thing to do. Why? And how? We'll see it right in the Word of God. Genesis chapter 3, verse 1. "Now the serpent was more crafty than any other beast of the fields that the eternal God had made. He said to the woman, 'Did God actually say, you shall not eat of any tree in the garden?' And the woman said to the serpent, 'We may eat of all of the fruit in the trees in the garden.' Verse 3, 'But God said, you shall not eat of the fruit of the tree that is in the midst of the garden. Neither shall you touch it, lest you die.' But the serpent said to the woman, That old familiar phrase that we've all heard, that we're all familiar with. You will not surely die. For God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. In your mind, in your heart, you will be able to make those determinations. Verse 6. So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, that's one reason right there, right? Remember reasoning? And that it was a delight to the eyes, that's two. And that the tree was to be desired to make one wise, well, that's three, isn't it? She took of its fruit and ate, and she also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate. And we know that Adam was convinced as well, and we know for both of them, this was a bad decision. Were they convinced that a decision about it was not as important as what they were originally told? Yeah, I guess so. Did they have logical reasons to help them form their decision? They had three, right? Were the immediate benefits considered, at least those presented to them? Did they consider all the facts? Did they go back to God to check on things? Bad decision. Let's look over at Genesis 4 now. In Genesis 4, we read about Cain, who didn't agree with or accept God's decision and acted on emotion, rage, and made a decision. Pretty quickly, but I think we might see something a bit interesting in the process that he went through before making that bad decision. Genesis chapter 4, verse 1. Now Adam knew Eve his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain, saying, I have gotten a man with the help of the Eternal. Verse 2, and again she bore his brother Abel. Now Abel was a keeper of sheep, and Cain a worker of the ground. In the course of time, Cain brought to the Eternal an offering of the fruit of the ground. Verse 4, and Abel also brought of the firstborn of his flock and of their fat portions, and the Eternal had regard for Abel and his offering. Verse 5, but for Cain and his offering he had no regard. So Cain was very angry, and his face fell. And we know the end of the story. A decision was made, and action was taken. They were based on personal feelings, on emotions, on where his heart led him. The long-term results were evidently not in mind, but were brought to the front rather quickly. The importance of the decision and what it would reap wasn't taken into account. And the responsibility itself was attempted to be dodged. Was prayer involved? Perhaps we don't usually think about this, but even though Cain didn't go to God, we read in verses 6 and 7 that God actually came to Cain because of his initial reaction. Genesis chapter 4, verse 6, the Eternal said to Cain, why are you angry? And why has your face fallen? Verse 7, if you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at your door. Its desire is for you, but you must rule over it. It's interesting that God was dealing with the present and the future, not only the past, as if there was no chance for Cain doing well. He didn't say, if you had done well, you wouldn't have been a failure. No, instead of that, God was giving him options to repent, to set things straight, and to go forward. But Cain, instead of dealing or deciding to act in accordance with what he had been told, what he knew, what he had been offered, an opportunity to set things right, he made the decision he did. A bad decision. Again, there are quite a few examples of bad decisions being made throughout the Bible, and if any come to mind, you might want to look into them and examine how they were made, and perhaps why they were made, instead of just thinking of the results, to give you some more pointers, some more keys than we may cover this afternoon. Certain examples that you may be thinking of may include Abraham, Lot's wife, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, Joseph's sons. And sometimes when I read these stories, and you may have experienced the same, I think, what were you thinking? What were you thinking? I remember a story about a waitress in a little cafe who, probably found her job a little boring and thought her interaction with the customers, she didn't want it to be boring, so she decided to put a little twist on things. And when she would come to their table and introduce herself, instead of saying, "What would you like to order?" she'd say, "What? Would you like to order?" And sometimes I think of this in relationship to the question, what were you thinking? And I think, what? Were you thinking? But anyway, we might actually be able to identify with some of those thoughts ourselves. Let's look at Exodus chapter 32. Exodus 32. And when examining this subject, it came across a little bit different to me, and it may do the same to you as well. Or there may be some elements that we'll look into a little bit more or focus on. So Exodus chapter 32, verse 1. Now when the people saw that Moses delayed, you heard the word delayed, right? Coming down from the mountain, the people gathered together to Aaron and said to him, "Come, make us gods that shall go before us. For as for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him." We don't know. We're not sure about this. But whatever it is, it just doesn't feel the way we want it to feel. And we feel we need to make a decision. So here's our decision. We don't have any evidence that they talked to Aaron about it and asked, "What do you think?" But they talked amongst themselves, came to a conclusion, a decision, and then brought it before him. And obviously he took action based on what they were saying. Were they fulfilling a need that they apparently had? Yep, it looks like that, doesn't it? Were they basing their decision on information they had previously received? That Moses would be going up to the mountain, and then he shall return. Were they trusting themselves when they said, "We don't know about where he is, and we want to make a decision"? Initially, their decision and the results of it seemed awesome. A celebration. This is wonderful. This is so fulfilling, so uplifting. We've been waiting around looking at our, sundials, not knowing what's going on, and we just had enough. So now we are having a good time. Initially, that decision that bad decision seemed awesome. But we know what the result of it was, and we know what came about as a result of that as well. There may be some other examples that you're thinking of or that come to mind. For instance, regarding Moses, a decision that he made, an action that actually kept him out of the promised land. Saul, who took matters into his own hands after, again, that watch was being looked at, that sundial. Things weren't happening. I'm the leader. I need to make a decision, and this is what I think that will really be fulfilling to the people, and it'll be okay. Bad decision. We know of some other decisions made by David, made by Solomon. Let's take a look at one decision in 1 Kings chapter 12 that seems to be really pointed at one of the keys that we covered. 1 Kings chapter 12. 1 Kings chapter 12. We'll begin in verse 1. In verse 1, we read, Rehoboam, remember him, son of Solomon. He went to Shechem, where all Israel had gathered to make him king. When Jeroboam, son of Nebat, heard of this, he returned from Egypt, for he had fled to Egypt to escape from King Solomon, and that's another story. But he returned to Egypt, from Egypt. Verse 3, the leaders of Israel summoned him, and Jeroboam and the whole assembly of Israel went to speak with Rehoboam. Verse 4, they said, your father was a hard master, they said. And I'm sure they most likely said that with respect and not just making a lot of noise, because they were seeking his leadership to be what they were hoping for. Lighten the harsh labor demands and heavy taxes that your father imposed on us. Then we will be your loyal subjects. Verse 5, Rehoboam replied, give me 3 days to think this over, then come back for my answer. So the people went away. So this was evidently wanting to avoid a bad decision, or so it seems, right? He didn't want to have any knee-jerk reaction, or so it seems, but taking some time to come to a solid conclusion. Verse 6, then King Rehoboam discussed the matter with the older men who had counseled his father, Solomon. What is your advice, he asked. How should I answer these people? The older counselors replied, and most likely in a very respectful way, if you were willing to be a servant to these people and give them a favorable answer, they will always be your loyal subjects, or they will be your servants. As you seek to serve them, they will want to serve you. So wow, these older guys, not just one of them, with years of experience, who worked with Solomon when he was king, had seen his actions, the results of his actions, what they had on the people, and thus on the kingdom, were asked for their advice, and they shared it. Verse 8. But Rehoboam rejected the advice of the older men. Oh, okay. And instead asked the opinion of the young men who had grown up with him and were now his advisors, right? Now remember, who was Rehoboam? Who was Solomon? Solomon was a very wealthy man. Rehoboam grew up a very wealthy boy. And the kids that he hung out with, that he played with, that he had fun with, and probably expensive fun with, and they got along great. They thought the same way. They nodded in agreement. It was they who he sought advice from instead of from the older man. And we talked about that earlier, didn't we? Verse 9, "What is your advice?" he asked them. "How should I answer these people who want me to lighten the burdens imposed by my father?" The young men replied, "This is what you should tell those complainers, those whiners, who want a lighter burden. My little finger is thicker than my father's waist." You know, I guess that was an expression of the time, showing that he was being much more powerful than his father was. "Yes, my father laid heavy burdens on you, but I'm going to make them even heavier. My father beat you with whips, but I will beat you with scorpions." Verse 12, 3 days later, Jeroboam and all the people returned to hear Rehoboam's decision, just as the king had ordered. Give me a few days to come to a conclusion. Verse 13, "But Rehoboam spoke harshly to the people, for he rejected the advice of the older counselor." Why is that being repeated? "And followed the counsel of his younger advisors." Why is that being repeated? You know, and I'm confident he didn't pray about it either. Well, what do you think? Things didn't go well from there forward. Bad decision. We, of course, have examples in the New Testament too, with the Pharisees, with the Sadducees, Judas Iscariot, Ananias and Sapphira, others who had become leaders within the church serving the apostles. Other examples, and we have probably our own histories as well. Experience that we have developed, that we can learn from, and that we can teach as well. Hopefully today we have learned or have been reminded of some fundamental keys in making decisions that can have a very negative impact on not only our lives now, sometime in the future, or perhaps forever, but sometimes, if not often, can have a very negative impact on others as well. Family, friends, brethren, co-workers, neighbors, and so on. So if you want to make a bad decision, follow these keys. And remember, you don't have to follow all of them. Just pick out one, or a couple, or all, and you will be very successful in making bad decisions. Okay, now for the rest of you that may not want to follow my advice, first I will mention that this is not the halfway point in my message. Let's turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 10. 1 Corinthians chapter 10. Some knew I eventually was going to come here, but then they wondered more and more as time went on. 1 Corinthians chapter 10. Our God is a merciful God. He is a forgiving God, and one who desires to strengthen us in his way and in his word, through his Spirit, and through each other as well. And we're aware of quite a few examples of bad decision-making processes in the Bible that were learned from, repented of, and changed, and hopefully in us as well, now and in the future. If you want to avoid making bad decisions, you'll want to avoid these keys. All of them. Every single one. Because as mentioned, any one of them or a combination can really bring about poor results. Perhaps not immediately, but no doubt eventually. 1 Corinthians 10, verse 11. 1 Corinthians 10, verse 11, referring to some of the things I referenced earlier. Now, all these things happened to them as examples, and they were written that we follow them as best we can. Oh, no, yours doesn't say that? No, doesn't say that at all. They happened to them as examples. They were written for our admonition, for our warning, for our learning, for our embedding into our minds and hearts to learn from their experiences more than from perhaps our own experiences. Written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the ages have come. And I think more and more we see things going around us that are extremely troubling and tell us that we need to stay close to God, that we need to be on guard day in and day out, that we need to be looking to Him and looking to follow His guidance and His direction so that we avoid doing what we have seen others do and suffer from, not only in the past, but even during our own lifetimes as well. Verse 12, therefore let him who thinks he stands take heed lest he fall. Decisions, decisions, decisions. Bad decisions, good decisions. Let's prepare ourselves even more and be on guard for future decisions that we will be responsible to make.